Hey everybody, it is time for another 2021-2022 season preview, and with Kirill Kaprizov finally signed, it is time to do the Minnesota Wild, a team that had a really strong year last year, was a lot better than I thought they were going to be. I think they were a lot better than most people thought they were going to be last season, and we'll see if they're able to carry that success over into this year and have another great year. Before we begin, I just ask you to please subscribe and hit that thumbs up. It helps the channel so much and is greatly appreciated. But let's get into it, and before we look ahead, we need to look back. Like I said, Minnesota had a really good season last year. They went 35-16-5, 75 points, and a third-place finish in the West Division. And this was a team that a lot of people thought was going to be fairly mediocre heading into the year. They ended up with 75 points, which is the same amount of points as eventual Stanley Cup champion Tampa Bay Lightning had. Now, obviously, the Lightning were without Nikita Kucherov all season long in the regular season, so that certainly played a role in that. But still, I mean, for a team that wasn't expected to do much, for them to have that level of success, it was a really surprisingly good year for the Minnesota Wild last year. And I think a lot of it stemmed from their offense. They scored 3.21 goals for per game last year, which was really good. And they're a team that's kind of stereotyped as being a defensive, slow, boring team. And that's what they were for a long time. But these Minnesota Wild are not, your father's Minnesota Wild. This is not the same kind of team from 2008 or 2012 or anything like that. Like, this is a new style for the Minnesota Wild where they are an offensive team. And they scored a lot of goals last year. And they were still pretty good defensively, 2.84 goals against per game. Definitely nothing spectacular. Not really a lockdown defensive team, but man, the explosion in the offense has really allowed this team to win some more games. And they were still very solid defensively, don't get me wrong. So, this kind of new style for Minnesota worked very well last year. One thing I think that they're going to be looking to improve upon this year is definitely their special team. So power play was not very good, just 17.6% on the power play. They're definitely going to want to improve that. That's an area that needs to get better. And their penalty kill certainly wasn't bad at 80.8%. It was over the 80% mark that I look for in a penalty kill, but it wasn't super. It was just kind of, it was a good penalty kill. I think they can improve that. Power play definitely needs to be better. But all in all, it was a great year for Minnesota last year. And we're going to see if they're able to have a repeat performance this coming season. They're certainly going to be going for it. This offseason, there's certainly been some changes for the Minnesota Wild. Obviously, the biggest ones, Zach Parise and Ryan Suter, bought out this offseason, no longer members of the team. Those were guys that were still playing a pretty significant role on this roster. Parise, not as much, but still a middle six winger gone out of your lineup. And Ryan Suter was a top pair defenseman for the Minnesota Wild last season. So losing him out of the lineup is definitely a hit. And obviously they saved some money on the cap with those two being bought out for this season. But losing Suter is definitely going to have an impact on the lineup. They also lost defenseman Carson Soucy to the Seattle Kraken in the expansion draft. That is definitely going to have an impact as well because he was a pretty darn good young defenseman for them. Defenseman Ian Cole is now in Carolina. He's gone as well. Forward Nick Bonino is in San Jose. And forwards Marcus Johansson and depth forward Luke Johnson were not re-signed as well. So they've had a decent number of NHL bodies come out of the lineup this offseason. And when we look over at the addition side of things, they brought in veteran defenseman Alex Goligoski and Dmitry Kulikov to kind of make up for some of those defensemen that have been taken out of the lineup. Freddie Goodrow comes over from the Pittsburgh Penguins. I thought in limited game action, he actually played pretty well for the Penguins last year. Obviously, with Bonino and Johansson leaving the lineup, Parise gone as well, they're going to need somebody to come in a depth role, and Goodrow is definitely a guy that can do that, and expect him to be a regular in the lineup for Minnesota. And they also added depth defensemen John Merrill and Jordy Ben in free agency as well, and they'll play depth roles on this team, 6th, 7th, 8th defenseman, depending on where they shake out after the preseason. But they'll definitely be defensive depth on the NHL roster. Now it is time to take a look at my projected roster for the Minnesota Wild this year. And going through their depth chart, looking at everybody, I think a lot of these spots are pretty well taken, but there might be a few that are up for grabs, and I'll definitely get into that. But starting with the forwards here, obviously, Kirill Kaprizov, Joel Eriksson, Kevin Fiala, Matt Zuccarello, Marcus Foligno, Jordan Greenway, Victor Rask, Ryan Hartman, even Freddie Goodrow, Nick Bjugstad. I think their spots are safe without a doubt. I do think Matthew Boldy makes this team. Looking at what they have coming up, look at what they have for depth guys. I see no reason why Matthew Boldy can't make this team this year. Especially with, losing some of those guys out of their middle part of that lineup. Boldy coming in on the wing, can play on the second line, can play on the third line, wherever you need him to. Definitely look for him to make the Minnesota Wild this year. Nico Sturm should have a fourth line role. And I see Kyle Rao probably being the extra forward for this team. But obviously, we'll see how it shakes out in training camp. On the defensive side of things, obviously, Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin, and Matt Dumba are who this D-core is built around. Then they went out and they brought in Alex Goligoski, and they brought in Dmitry Kulikov, two veteran guys who should easily be in the top 6. And much like Matthew Boldy, I think Kalen Addison makes this team out of training camp and plays the whole year for Minnesota. He, to me, is Carson Soucy's replacement. Soucy was a younger defenseman. He wasn't super young anymore. I think he's 26 now, but he was young when he came up with Minnesota, and he had played with the Wild for the last few years, and he's obviously now gone in the expansion draft. Kalen Addison is a guy that I think can step into a top 6 role. He's a young guy, going to be a rookie. If he does play, the full season, it'll be his rookie year. And definitely look for him to make this Minnesota Wild team, because I think they're going to carry 8 defensemen, and he certainly should be one of them. And then you have John Merrill and Jordy Ben kind of as your depth guys, your number 7 and number 8. If Addison struggles or doesn't make it for whatever reason, that one of them can step into the number 6 role. If somebody goes down with an injury, you'll have them as your 7 and 8 to fill in when needed. But I look at them as kind of depth guys that don't need to be in the lineup on a nightly basis. I think Addison has a very good shot of making this team. And in goal, it's pretty obvious. It's Cam Talbot and Kaapo Kähkönen, both returning for the Minnesota Wild, the same goaltending tandem that they had last year. And it was a very good goaltending tandem for them last year. Now, moving on to the depth side of things, they've got Joseph Cramarosa, who's kind of been a career tweener. He can step into a fourth-line role in the NHL if you need him, but I certainly think he starts in the AHL, where he spent most of his career. Marco Rossi, he's kind of a question mark heading into this training camp, because he got COVID really, really badly last year, didn't really play last year. Obviously, he was the guy that people were talking about possibly making the team last season, right out of his draft year, and then COVID put a huge stop to that. So we don't really know where Rossi's at as far as his game, as far as his conditioning, physically where he's at. That's why I don't have him making the team out of training camp. I think it's very likely he doesn't start with the NHL club. But there always is the possibility if he's back to full strength. But I think it's much more likely that they ease him back in, and then maybe later in the year we have a Marco Rossi sighting, or maybe next year he'll come in and it will be his rookie year. But COVID definitely put a little bit of a halt to his progress and development. And then they have a couple guys down in the AHL that I think could definitely see NHL games this year. One of them is Mason Shaw. He will certainly be high on the call-up list if they start to have some injuries. And Brandon Duhaime is another guy that's played in the AHL for the past couple years. He played at Providence College. I saw him play there. He's kind of a thorn in your side type player. I don't think he'll ever be a top 6 guy in the NHL, but if they needed a call up for the bottom 6 and they had, maybe 3 or 4 guys out of the lineup, Duhaime is definitely a guy that could get the call. On the defensive side of things, I mean, obviously I have them carrying 8 defensemen on this roster, so it would take quite a bit for them to dip into their depth below that, but they do have Kevin Churchman, who I want to say I had no idea you pronounce his name Churchman until researching for this video, because he played in Pittsburgh and he has NHL games under his belt, and he's a veteran guy. I was saying his name wrong the entire time, so my apologies to Kevin Churchman for that, but Churchman is how you say it, and he's a depth guy that could be called up if needed. And another one of those is Joe Hicketts. He's played in Detroit. He's been pretty much a career AHL guy, but if you need a call up, he is there. And when it comes to their third goaltender, it's looking like Andrew Hammond will likely be the third goalie. I think they're going to want to let their young guys just kind of stay and develop in the AHL and, play a regular schedule down in the AHL. So if they need a third goalie, I think they'd probably go with the veteran. And Andrew Hammond obviously has been kind of NHL, AHL, and AHL, NHL kind of throughout his career. But if, one of those 2 regulars, Talbot or Kakkonen, gets hurt, Hammond can step in for, a short period of time. But that is my projected roster for the Minnesota Wild this year. We'll see what happens over the course of training camp, over the course of the preseason. Obviously, this is just a projection. We won't know until the end of camp who actually makes it and who doesn't. But there's definitely some young guys here that I think should make this team. The big ones being Boldy and Addison. I see no reason why they can't be on the NHL roster for the entire season this year. And they've got some pretty good depth guys as well that can step in if needed. So Minnesota, obviously a really, really strong year last year. They're going to be looking for another strong season this year. They're definitely a team that's going to be contending for a playoff spot. The Central Division is, a pretty tough division. You've got some really good teams and some tough teams there, and it's going to be, a lot of evenly matched games throughout that division. But I see no reason why Minnesota can't make the playoffs, and getting Kaprizov back is absolutely huge for them. They would have been in trouble if they didn't get Kaprizov back, but with him signed now, I'm feeling pretty good about the Wild, and they should have another solid season here in 2021-22. But that's it for my season preview. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, our merch store, memberships, and donation links are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.